think the team is. So, hi everyone, I'm Helen Milner. I'm the Group Chief Exec at Good Things Foundation, and welcome to this episode of Digital Futures for Good. And it feels like an incredibly timely episode. Um, Anybody who has spent probably more than about 20 minutes with me since July knows that I have been very, very interested in the Pathways to Work Commission in Barnsley. And for me, it was because it was so exciting to see holistic thinking both at a local and at that kind of scaled and system level. Um, and so, of course, this week we've had the Get Britain Working white paper published just 2 days ago, with a number of trailblazers, which I'm sure we're going to go into. So how this works for the Digital Futures for Good episode is that I will come to Sophia and Oliver in a moment just to introduce themselves. And then we're going to be showing some clips of my conversation I had with Alan Milburn last week. So just before the white paper was published. And then Sophia and Oliver haven't seen these clips. So then I'm going to ask them some absolute questions about it. So, they're going to be quick off the hoof. So let's go to both of you. So Sophia, please introduce yourself, where you're from and why you're interested in this topic.
Thank you so much, Helen, and great to be here. So my name is Sophia Worringer, and I'm the Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. The Centre for Social Justice is an independent think tank, turns 20 this year, and we were set up to look at the root causes of poverty and disadvantage across the nation. And we've done a long stream of work looking at worklessness, economic inactivity, welfare reform, and of course also aspects of digital inclusion and how the most disadvantaged communities are left behind, but most importantly, not just about the problems, but also putting forward practical solutions to government, opposition parties, anyone who will work with us to improve the lives and opportunities of our most disadvantaged communities across the nation.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Sophia. And Oliver, lovely to see you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Nice to see you too. My name's Oliver Coppard. I am the Mayor of South Yorkshire and also, probably conveniently for this conversation, the Chair of the Integrated Care Partnership in South Yorkshire. So the first Mayor to have taken on that role, and now joined by Andy Burnham, which is brilliant. And I'm interested in this topic because I was one of the commissioners on the Pathways to Work Commission alongside Alan, Thorsten Bell and others. And because this is a huge challenge for South Yorkshire, but for the nation to fix. And we think South Yorkshire is absolutely in the vanguard of solving that problem. We have 70,000 workless households in South Yorkshire, and so we need to absolutely figure out new solutions to getting those people back into work, helping them live their fullest and most productive lives.
Brilliant. And we will definitely ask you, well, I will definitely ask you some questions about in South Yorkshire as well. It's fantastic. So let's go to our first clip from my conversation with Alan Milburn. So, Alan, the path that brought me here was actually your Pathways to Work Commission report. So, ever since I read it in July, I've been a massive fan. So, I don't know if the news has got back to you, but I've been talking about it everywhere, Labour Party conference, any panels I'm on. In fact, I've probably talked about it in Digital Futures for Good already before. I think what excites me about it is because it really epitomises that joined up thinking, and that joined up thinking really necessary to make like the Labour's missions work. And so that's really exciting and something that's been missing about that holistic view of how to help people with multiple challenges, but also recognising the economic benefit that that's going to bring to the country as well as to those individuals. So I really want to start by talking a bit about the Pathways to Work Commission and just kicking off, like, why did you do it and what did you think was the most significant finding about the Commission?
Well, thank you. You're very generous about the Commission and the report. So I got involved in it really because Steve Houghton, who's the leader of Barnsley Council, is a very old friend, and he correctly identified probably a couple of years ago this question of economic inactivity was going to be a big part of the public policy agenda. Because Barnsley, I guess, is, it's a bit of it's a micro of what's happened in the labour market over the last 30 or 40 years across the UK, in that this was the epicenter of the miners' strike in 1984, epicenter of mass unemployment, which is what I grew up with in the northeast of England in the 80s and 90s. And today it has lower unemployment than national average. It's absolutely remarkable. And their big problem, employers there, just like employers everywhere, is that they're short of labour. And in fact, the biggest constraint on economic growth now is that we're short of labour, which is a remarkable turnaround for those of us who grew up in the era of mass unemployment. Um, and you've got 2.8 million people or more who are off work sick. So that's quite a big problem. And if you've got constraints on immigration, which you have politically, because it's become a toxic issue, and you've got more or less full employment, Barnsley and elsewhere in the country, the question is where are the workers going to come from? And so we've got to find a way of getting people back to work who have either left the labour market or have not been in it. And I guess what we were trying to do in Barnsley was to really understand that phenomena in detail. So we did a lot of work, a lot of polling, a lot of survey work with people who are economically inactive. We talked to a lot of employers, talked to a lot of public agencies about what was going on. And I guess what we found are some basic facts and truths that hitherto have been hidden. The first is that you've got a group of people who have been effectively written off from the labour market, unfit to work, not actively seeking work, and therefore discounted as future workers. And yet we found when we polled them that 7 in 10 of them actually wanted a job. 8 in 10 of them were receiving a state benefit of one form or another, but only 1 in 10 of them were in any sort of contact with employment services to enable them to do the very thing that they wanted to do, which is work. So this is a perverse system. I mean, perverse in every regard. So there's loads of people who want to work, who could work. Hitherto, until recently, public policy has really been about trying to solve what is effectively a health problem, because most of these people have some sort of health problem, 3 in 4 of them in Barnsley, people who are economically inactive with a health problem. And the public policy answer has been to hit them with benefit sanctions or the threat of that. So it just doesn't work, and it hasn't worked. And the stock of the economically inactive is growing, and people are leaving the labour market, particularly young people, which is really worrying. Mental health problems, and becoming economically inactive. So we need a complete change in tack. And what the report really does is analyse that and describe how a solution could work, based both upon what could happen locally, but what needs to happen nationally in terms of public policy with a new government.
So, Alan, the path that there was I trying to start again, and there was I again. Oliver, let's come to you first, because obviously, as you said, you were a commissioner for Pathways to Work, and I'm sure it feels like quite a lot has happened actually since that report got published. So that the clear link between poor health and economic inactivity, but also that lack of contact with the employment support, or with the generic support, I guess, to help people back on that pathway. So you're going to be doing a trailblazer in South Yorkshire around economically inactive people, but also there's the health growth work that you're doing. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that, and how it has evolved from that Pathways to Work?
Well, so Helen, you say a lot has happened, and it has happened. A lot has happened, but it's not happened by accident. So in South Yorkshire, we've had a real focus on this challenge. The reason I said when I became mayor 2.5 years ago that I wanted South Yorkshire to be the healthiest region in the country, which people on this call, people watching subsequently, and people who've heard me say that before, will know just how big a challenge that is. I don't say that lightly. I don't say it because I think it will happen tomorrow. I say it because it's a generational shift. But it's a generational shift that we need to see, because as Alan articulated, this is scarring, still affecting our communities since the days of the miners' strike, and indeed before then, the industrial communities that we had have led us to now have significant health challenges. So, as I said earlier, 1 in 4 people in South Yorkshire are economically inactive. That is 1/3 of our economic challenge related to health conditions and health challenges. So we particularly focused on how we address that challenge through things like the Working Win programme, which was initially delivered through South Yorkshire Housing Association. We now have Working Well, which is a similar thing, again, run by SYHA, which is our kind of tailored approach to helping people back into work, because we recognise how big a problem is that is for our communities and for our economy. And so since the Pathways to Work Commission, we have worked tirelessly with government, previously the opposition, the Labour Party, to be able to kind of work out how we could deliver that solution in South Yorkshire and show not just people in South Yorkshire, but show people nationally how to solve those problems. Because our argument would very strongly be, if you can fix that in South Yorkshire, you can fix it anywhere. And just to take your last point there about kind of often people having not enough contact with the system, actually the argument from the Pathways to Work Commission is often people have too much contact. There are too many routes into the system. I've just been down at our ICP meeting where we've been talking about some of that. The system is hugely complex and hugely complicated. And we're looking at what solutions we can put in to address that. And we'll come on to this, I'm sure. But the story I tell is a friend of mine who actually had a job, but I think that the point holds, had a job, wanted to get an apprenticeship, wanted to apply for a couple of jobs, wanted to look at his options, didn't have a laptop. So he came around to my house to use my laptop because he only had his phone. Got to my house, realised that kind of navigating the apprenticeship system was too complicated. I couldn't help him. It was our system, but I didn't know how to navigate that either. We run the apprenticeship system in South Yorkshire, but it was too complex. I didn't understand how to get him what he needed. And then applying for the two jobs, actually instead, we got him onto ChatGPT, and he used ChatGPT to apply for two jobs within the space of an hour. Now, using different tools and techniques and approaches, you can navigate complex systems, but right now that system is too complex, and that's on us, not on the people who are currently out of work and who want to work. So this is a system problem, not just a health problem, and we need to be responsible for fixing the system.
Absolutely. And as you said, I'm sure we will get into this. Sophia, obviously at CSJ, you've done quite a bit of work around economic inactivity. Were you surprised at that 7 in 10 number, about 7 out of 10 people surveyed in Barnsley who are economically inactive wanted to work? And what do you think the kind of policy solution is? That don't spoil everything, we're going to talk about other things as well, but so just from your point of view, what's the research that you've done shown you?
Yeah, I'm absolutely not surprised actually about that 7 in 10 figure, because we've done similar work across the nation. So obviously that was a region, but looking at those who are in the cohort of economically inactive for health related reasons, which we know peaked at about 2.8 million earlier last year. And we know from our research that 700,000 of them would want to work, but crucially, if given the right support. Because the problem for many of this cohort is the fact that the system itself almost traps them in this category of being out of the benefits regime, which is, appropriate for their health conditions. They don't have the same kind of monitoring for those who are actively seeking work, who are classified as unemployed, but it also means that often they are then parked and often forgotten about. And it feels like, from conversations that we've had up and down the country, that the biggest thing that people talk to us about is the risk of going to work. So they have their support, financial and otherwise, at the moment as an economically inactive person who's off work with sickness. And they are concerned that if they move into work, or they even start the process of that, whether that be undergoing training or some kind of education, that they will not be able to return to what they had before. And then they will have to go back through the assessment process and may not return to the same financial support that they had before. So the risk is something that is really clear. And the previous government and this government have committed to ways to mitigate that, the kind of chance to work guarantee, into work guarantee, it's been called different things, and to try and smooth that risk so that people have a kind of grace period of 6 months so they can make that transition to work. If it doesn't work out, they can go back to what they were on before. But that needs to be rolled out at pace, and there needs to be more energy around getting that message out, because a lot of the problem is the gap between the perception and the reality. So people perceive to be very trapped in the system, and whether they are or not, whether there is actually flex within the system, is almost immaterial. The important thing, is that they feel trapped, and therefore they don't make that those steps that they need and that they want to make, many of them, to go to work. So we need to do lots of work there in helping people feel like there is a roadmap, a route out for them if they feel that is the best thing for them. And we know, of course, that for many people, work is the best place to be. Obviously not always, and there's huge exceptions to that, but the right type of work that is flexible, that takes into account people's health considerations, or takes into account the fact that they may be fluctuating in the kind of work they can do week to week, that kind of understanding is really important. So we want to see more of that.
Fantastic. I could probably spend the whole hour just talking to the two of you, but let's listen to a bit more of Alan. Obviously, I want to talk about digital inclusion as well. So let's hear a bit more from Alan from the chat I had with him.
The first thing that you've really got to do is you've got to accept that local labour markets and local places are all different. Okay, so one of the recommendations in the report, which indeed the new government, the Labour government, is enacting, is to devolve responsibility for employment support away from Job Centre Plus being run as a national organisation to instead being run much more locally. So the idea is to give mayors control over those employment support services. That's the first thing. Second thing that you've then got to do is you've got to align employment support, career services and healthcare, because a lot of these problems are health related, and you've got to get these agencies working as one. And at the moment, they're like ships that pass in the night. They just don't connect. Third thing that you've got to do is you've got to make sure that you know what are the cohorts that can both benefit from that support, and you've got to personalize that support to the individual, because every individual has very different family circumstances, health needs, and so on. And so that's a real cultural reinvention of the way that employment support currently works. A lot of employment support is really founded in an organization that's fundamentally about benefits compliance. And it isn't that you don't need some sticks, because you do, but we've got to move the balance between sticks and carrots to be in a better place than it is at the moment. And then the final piece of the action is public policy at a national level. And this is really about what the government, I hope, will do in its white paper shortly to be published around work and economic inactivity. There are some profound changes in public policy that need to happen at a national level about the way that the benefit system works, the way that employers are engaged, etc.
Fantastic. Okay, good. So Sophia, let's come to you first, because obviously there's I'm sure Alan's Oliver's ears pricked up when he talked about giving more power to mayors, and I'm sure he's got a lot to say about that. So Sophia, when you were talking before, I felt like you were saying very much that people were trapped from a financial point of view, because that it's about taking that risk about going into a job where you might not physically, health-wise, be able to complete it. You might end up having less money. But what Alan was saying there about the ships that pass in the night, about the health system, the employment system, and other support, what do you think? And from your research, have you seen any good practice, maybe from other countries, where they've actually managed to do that knitting so that the individual, I mean, Oliver was saying this before, that the individual doesn't have to go and find it, so that actually the system provides that holistic support?
Yeah, really good question. And we also actually want to give mayors more money. So Oliver will be very happy to hear that. And I can talk about what we want to see. We want £6 billion of devolved employment support and adult education budget to go to regions across the country. But in terms of where abroad has fixed this problem, so we actually have a blueprint of what a country has done that has really got to grips with economic inactivity, and that is in the Netherlands. So they devolved their employment support and adult education, and they have seen a 3 times faster rate of solving this problem than the UK has. And in fact, before the COVID-19 pandemic, the UK was kind of on par. In fact, it was, I think, the second best in the G7 for economic inactivity, but COVID blew that out of the water, and we're now trailing almost every country in Europe. So what we can learn is from our neighbours across the channel about what they've done, and they really moved that money away from the centre and into the regions. And what is crucial that Alan also spoke about is that they separated out, and this is what the Centre for Social Justice want to see as well, really important to separate out that support, which is you can get into work, let's find a way for you that to work, let's kind of make you further along that journey and really kind of for you, from the centralized sanctions enforcement side of the DWP. So if those two roles separated out and the DWP retain that central responsibility for enforcement, but the local councils, mayors, other administrations retain responsibility for tailored support, then you can see really good effects. And I think it's important that having that separation means that people feel like they're not going to a coach to report challenges which may then be potentially used against them. Although I think it is important to remember that in fact the people who receive sanctions in the universal credit system is still fairly low. It in fact fell to almost zero during the pandemic and has started to fall again from the peak of last year, which was about 7.3%. So really we're talking about small numbers, but of course the perception of sanctions is hard to measure, and it may be the fact that people are concerned about that creates a barrier. So they do have a role, absolutely, but the number of people who are actually affected by them are very small.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the other thing though is that that within the sort of DWP system, it's the effort that's put in around managing conditionality as opposed to managing support. So it may be that sanctions aren't terribly high, but I think there's a lot of time spent on managing conditionality. So are people doing the conditions of their benefits? So Ollie, coming to you, the greater devolution of employment support. Actually, I, as part of Digital Futures for Good, I interviewed Andy Burnham in June. I think it was during the before the general election, but during the campaign. And I asked him what more devolved powers would he like, and he actually said employment. I think he said welfare support, and I said, is that even possible? But so obviously we now seem to have a white paper, we have we have this approach. So what are you going to do with this new support, or what are you going to do in your trailblazers? So how can you make sure the ships don't pass in the night? People don't have to do the knitting for themselves, particularly if they've got all kinds of different challenges.
Quite a lot of mixed metaphors there, isn't it? But I mean, firstly, it's good to hear that everybody is now agreeing that mayors should have more power, money, and control. I'm glad we're all agreed on that. Look, I think there is such a thing as a devolution dividend, right? And the government have said they want to devolve by default, and I think that's absolutely right. And the reason for that, because what you get is more efficient spending of public funds, which right now couldn't be more important, because ultimately we know our communities best. We look people in the eye when we make our decisions, and we're able to tailor support in a much more personalised way. And frankly, it is just a more personalised system when it is organised and delivered closer to the person. And I have a kind of firm belief, frankly, that one of the reasons why we're in such a mess politically, arguably nationally, but frankly, potentially globally, is because what people feel increasingly is like a loss of agency. They feel a loss of agency in a system which is incredibly complex. Why did people reject the EU? Well, it was potentially because they felt like the system was too far away and too complex for them to engage with in any meaningful way. And as systems get more and more complex, and politicians frankly don't like stopping doing things, they love doing things, but they don't like stopping doing some of the old things. What you find is these systems get layered upon layers, and therefore you find people locked out of systems when they become too complicated. So some of this is just about stripping it back to its essential service, which is to help people. We are here to help people to help themselves, to get back into work, to get the training and the support that they need in order to do those things. Now, devolution gives you that chance, but it is not taken for granted that we would be able to do that simply because we do get more power or money or control. But what the government are talking to us about is not just how can you devolve things like DWP funding, it's also about how do you actually connect up systems. So we heard the reference to adult education before. That's fundamentally important, to be able to have more flexibility and control over adult education budgets that are delivered locally, and then tailor that and work within a system which says this is connected to employment support and getting people back into work, but also thinking about things like transport. So one of the significant reasons why people are often locked out of training or employment is because they can't get a bus to work. Now, as mayors take back more control over buses and transport, we get to be in a place where we're able to say this is not just about how do we get profit out of that system, because ultimately when it's a public service, it's not for profit, but how do we actually think about this in its most holistic sense, so we're connecting people up to opportunity. And that's what we're trying to do in South Yorkshire, but equally it's what the government wants to do through things like single pot settlements, which they promise places like South Yorkshire. So South Yorkshire, in common with Greater Manchester and the West Midlands, will get a single pot settlement, which allows us just to say, actually, that big pot of money is going to be tailored to support a single goal, which is helping people. And helping people means not just DWP type sanctions, although there will always be sanctions, as we just heard, but actually how do we give people the opportunity to do what we know they want to do, which is to work, which is to have a job and to live a fulfilling life.
So back to my mixed metaphors of ships passing in the night and,
yes.
So in South Yorkshire, the proof of concept, I think it was called, in the Pathways to Work Commission report, was about having this sort of like system steward or system manager, like a navigator. So is that the big idea? I mean, clearly the big idea is to actually have some proper investment in all of the different bits of the service that people need to be navigating through. But in South Yorkshire, my understanding is that you're going to have in the Trailblazer this new role, which is someone from, you know, the state, from the public service, helping people to navigate the different parts of the services available to them.
Yeah, I think there's a number of big ideas in there, so I wouldn't necessarily single out one, but I think absolutely the money is important. You know, we can't do this without more funding, which is why the announcement about the funding the other day was so significant, and why we've been working so hard to make sure that funding was made available. And Alan Milburn has been a huge help behind the scenes in talking to ministers and working with us to make sure that happens. Certainly, you know, these kind of work coaches are part of that solution. They're part of the big idea, and that's because we found through the Pathways to Work Commission that actually people just need help. They don't know how to navigate these systems, and actually being able to navigate that means getting someone in who's going to be able to help you. That takes money and it takes resource, but that's where we're getting to. But we also need that system to be more streamlined. So, you know, genuinely, like, the system is so hugely complex in South Yorkshire, not just a one system either. There are kind of 4 systems within that. So you've got Barnsley, Rotherham, Doncaster and Sheffield, all with their individual systems. Some of them cut across boundaries, some of them don't. So kind of navigating that is incredibly complex. So we have to streamline the system. We have to make sure people then get help to navigate that streamlined system. And then we have to give them the personalised support that they need. One of the things that really stood out to me about the work that South Yorkshire Housing Association did on Working Win was when I heard from the people going through that programme who said, I was down on my luck, I wasn't in work, I wanted to work, and I called up SYHA and I got a phone call back within 24 hours. And how important that was as a consistent theme, because when you get that moment of motivation, when you aren't feeling like you necessarily want to do it, but you get that moment where you go, okay, I'm going to finally get a grip on this. If you phone up and then it takes 3 months for someone to write you an email back which says fill in this 7-page form which tells us why or what you want to do, and then you get another one back in another 3 months' time, you just lose all motivation and faith in the system. Actually getting that person who says, I'm on your team and we want you to succeed, and actually South Yorkshire is behind you, feels really important, and it's what we can do through this programme.
This is obviously also, Ollie, going to be cross-sectoral, right? So this isn't just about what's available from the state, is that... No. I mean, obviously the work that we do at Good Things Foundation, we work with thousands of community organisations, but that's so incredibly important in Barnsley, right?
Yeah. Hugely important. Hugely important for us to work with the VCSE. Hugely important for us to work with other parts of the public sector, but also working with private sector employers. We can't get jobs without employers, right? And employers are, of course, the public sector, but they have to be the private sector. And it can't simply be another burden for the private sector. There has to be a sense of us being in this together to try and unlock the potential of our communities, to free up the labour market so that the businesses we have in South Yorkshire can grow in the way they want to, not just simply, we're putting this problem onto you, you give them a job and deal with the problems that they come with. That is not how this system should or will work, and that's what we're determined to do with this programme.
And also we know that, and Sophie alluded to this already, is that good work is good for you, but bad work is not, right? And so you not only need that partnership with employers to make sure that the jobs are there, that obviously the system, if you like, needs to make sure that people are ready for work. So when they get the job, they're going to do that job well. But we don't want to be funneling people who have a complex issues, potentially haven't worked for a while, into a job that isn't actually going to be supportive. And I thought that was the other thing about the Pathways to Work Commission. A lot of people said they wanted to work, but they wanted to work part-time, they wanted to work flexibly, you know, they needed potentially their caring responsibilities to be understood. But that's tough for an employer who wants to employ people to come and work to help them to deliver that growth, right?
And is this question to me? Yeah. So absolutely. I mean, we heard from very good employers in South Yorkshire about how they are working to try and solve some of the challenges faced by people who want to work but have caring responsibilities, have different issues that they need to solve in order to be part of that employment workforce. And they are doing that. So good employers want to do it, and we want more employers in South Yorkshire. But I think the fundamental principle that underlies this piece of work is that when people do not work, often, particularly the 7 out of 10 that we know want to work, that is our fault, not theirs. That is the fundamental principle that we have to hold on to when we're going through this process. 7 out of 10 people want to be in a job. They want to be able to work. They want to be able to provide for themselves and their families. They want the purpose that comes with a good job. They want to be able to do all those things that you get when you get a good job, go down the pub with your workmates afterwards, be able to have a game of five-a-side with your colleagues after work and all those sorts of things, and a cup of tea, you know, on your lunch break. They want all of those things, but actually we're not helping them to do those things, the challenges that they face. So we have to center that problem on us and the systems that we've created haven't solved the problems that they face, and go from that point, not simply say it's their fault, they're not wanting to work and they're all lazy buggers, because we know that is absolutely not true. We just know that's not true. So let's get ourselves into that mindset. Lots of people in the system already have that mindset, but let's expand on that point to make sure that it runs throughout the systems that we create.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, let's go to the next film. I think this might be a surprise to me, but let's go to the next film and see what that is. I mean, obviously, we're a digital inclusion charity, Alan, so I want to talk about digital inclusion. That there wasn't a lot in the Commission report about digital inclusion, but I suppose I felt that was because it underpins everything that we need to do here. It underpins improving health, improving skills, helping people out of poverty, helping people into work. 92% of all jobs require people to have basic digital skills. And also, you mentioned in the report about people, for example, using mental health apps to help them with depression or other forms of mental illness. So there wasn't a lot in the report, but do you think that digital inclusion could form part of future solutions around, I'm going to now move on from Pathways to Work and talk about Get Britain Working, because obviously that's the white paper that's coming up.
Yes, I mean, obviously it's got a big part to play because the future is digital. We know that. And, you know, we can't afford to have, I think the numbers are pretty stark, you know, almost a third of people who are economically inactive, you know, don't have decent digital access at the moment. So that's a huge problem. And, you know, it's rather like saying people don't have access to electricity or gas or water. It's just a vital utility nowadays. And you've got a whole bunch of people, as you know better than anyone, are excluded as a consequence. And that is going to get worse, not better, unless we're very, very careful. So absolutely, all of that has got to be underpinned by making sure that there is fair and equal digital access, because otherwise the opportunities that are going to be available to people are going to be unevenly distributed. And frankly, we've got enough of that in our society. We don't want the gap getting wider. We want it getting narrower. And this is why, actually, you know, I'm relatively positive and optimistic about the government's agenda, because at its heart, you know, I think what they're trying to do is to create a more inclusive economy, you know, growth economy, but one that is a form of inclusive growth. And digital has got an absolutely vital part to play in all of that.
Fantastic. So, Sophia, coming to you first, is that the fact that digital inclusion isn't sort of out in neon lights across all of this policy, do you think that's because it's just as Alan was saying, it's just there. It's part of the basic utility of what we now expect people to have alongside skills, etc. So do you think we should be doing more with digital inclusion in these policy areas?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is expected that people have it. Whether they do or not is obviously a different question. And um, as I said before, the CSJ has turned 20 this year, and part of the way we've marked our 20th year anniversary is that we have done a deep dive into the state of poverty across the nation, and that resulted in a report published in December last year called Two Nations. And it really showed this divide, not just across digital exclusion, but across a whole range of experiences. And I think this is where digital exclusion and economic inactivity kind of come together, because this is about a cohort of people who are being left behind, are kind of being parked by the system, who are feeling like the rest of the world is moving on without them. And it is causing things like the riots that we saw in the summer. You know, people are feeling that unrest, feeling like they're living in a parallel society. Obviously, there were complex reasons driving those riots. It wasn't just one reason, but this idea of having two societies living side by side, I think, is becoming more and more entrenched, whether that's because you are digitally excluded or economically inactive or both. And so I do think, yeah, this feeling of division is feeling very deep. But of course, the type of work available is also changing, and there is more and more online work, remote work. The way that you access jobs is almost exclusively online through adverts, job applications, research for job applications that you might make. That is moving more and more online, in fact, almost exclusively. So it is incredibly difficult for people to make that first step if they find themselves in this left behind cohort without that digital access.
That's right. And Ollie, the actually South Yorkshire's been a bit of a flag waver. We had one of your colleagues, Katie Dowson, on our health episode in July. So looking at the way in which digital inclusion and health can work very closely together, but obviously now bringing in the economic inactivity, the skills, the employment, so bringing all of that support together. I mean, you mentioned it already with your friend with his ChatGPT, but no laptop, right? And we know that 25% of people who have a long-term health condition or a disability are going to be digitally excluded. Quite rightly, in my opinion, the government is very strong on saying that there's going to be a radically improved digital offer, that there's going to be digital front doors for the health services. But clearly, unless we bring digital inclusion into this discussion much more clearly, we're potentially going to be on one side pushing digital solutions, but on the other side, again, leaving people behind.
Yeah, I mean, I come back to the principle of this is our fault, not theirs, right? In the sense of we have to meet people where they are. And that goes, you know, double when you're dealing with people who have drifted away from the system or who have been failed by the system over time. And so kind of how do we go to those people with a genuine offer to say, we're here to help in the way that you need us to help, rather than here's an inflexible system that we're asking you to engage with whether you can or not. And so kind of sometimes that will mean personalized work coaching and personal meetings and actually a physical appointment that says, we're here and what can we do to talk about that? And for some people, that will be more comfortable to be done digitally. And we have to be able to flex the system so that we're able to do both of those things equally well. And, you know, digital exclusion, and forgive me for kind of preaching to the converted, but digital exclusion does not simply just mean, right, have you got a Wi-Fi connection or have you got a laptop? It also means, are the systems set up in such a way as you can genuinely engage with them rather than they're just there for certain people to engage with, those people with a certain level of digital literacy already. I think one of the really exciting things about what we're seeing from the kind of next step in the tech revolution is kind of that more personalized response that you can get from things like AI models. So how can we use those AI models and those systems to streamline these services and allow people to engage with them in a way which is much more human-like? So being able to say, actually, and this is not about efficiencies in the system. This is not actually about saying, okay, we can get rid of 50,000 work coaches or whatever it is we want to do. It's not that. It's saying, actually, this is a better way of engaging that allows people to kind of use the service in a way that they want to use the service rather than the way we want to design it. And so that for me is really important. That bit of this revolution is really important, be that about navigating the skill system, navigating the employment support system, frankly, navigating the NHS and other services as well. How do we tailor and design public services that work for people rather than work for the services themselves, and flipping that question on its head.
Absolutely. I think, though, I would fundamentally say that everybody who wants one and feels capable should have a device, should have access to the internet, should have the basic digital skills that they need.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, and therefore that has to underpin this, because if 25% of the very people that are targeted don't have that because of both financial poverty, but also, you know, that they haven't been at work, so they haven't been developing skills, they haven't within communities where there's plenty of other people who don't have those skills and motivation, is that there's definitely a big job to do. And you're absolutely right, Ollie, and is that this isn't a one-off thing. It's not like just give them a phone and they'll be fine, right?
Yeah.
Back to that integrating point, that digital inclusion has to be integrated with the whole piece.
Yeah, and I worry that public services and public service leaders, count myself in this, you know, as someone who can fall into this trap if we're not careful, I'm not careful, is we absolve ourselves of responsibility by giving people the tools, i.e. the laptop and the Wi-Fi connection and a desk, and say, over to you, your problem now, we've given you what you need in order to do this, rather than actually thinking about much more human-centered design in the system that allows people to engage in a meaningful way and the support they need to engage in that meaningfully. So it might not just be enough to say, okay, we've designed a website, we've given you a laptop and you've got a Wi-Fi connection. Actually, how can you have somebody, a person sitting next to them, helping them to do it so they know how to do it next time and the time after that? And so this is not about efficiencies in the system. This is not about getting rid of people out of the system. This is about saying, how do we do this better so humans are at the centre of a digital revolution, because it has to work for humans most, right?
Exactly. I mean, technology has to be about the people. Sophia, the Alan Milburn talked about inclusive growth and an inclusive economy. What's your take on that? And maybe actually this is the moment to ask you what you think about the white paper as well, Sophia.
Yeah, so I think obviously the government have been very clear that they are putting national missions of kickstarting economic growth as number one of their 5 national missions. That's absolutely the right thing to do. But you have to bring people with you. And I think the problem is the economic model we've had so far has always had that lever of kind of more workers from abroad, whether that's a good or a bad thing is a separate debate, but it's had that opportunity, which has meant that the kind of those who are potential workers already in the UK have been able to be parked because they are not kind of essential to the economic growth model. But that has changed, and that is not going to be the case going forward. So we do need to empower and upskill and support those people who are here who can have so much to offer. And this is not just about economic potential. This is about also kind of human potential, the wasted lives that are languishing in a system that traps them. Many of them want to work, we've talked about, and actually releasing their full potential, their increased mental health, in their increased community spirit and purpose by moving them into this kind of work pathway. In terms of the white paper, I think the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions is absolutely right in her instincts about this devolved direction of travel for employment support. At the Centre for Social Justice, we don't think it goes far enough. We like the 240 million. We would like 6 billion. So there's still a long way to go there, but she is moving in the right direction. But it needs to be quicker, and it needs to be faster in the way that it is enacted, because this is a problem that is only getting bigger, and forecasts of 100 billion by the end of this parliament, some calculations putting it up to 120 billion. That's the cost of health related economic inactivity. This is something we can't afford to pay. So there's no point tinkering around the edges. I would say it's one of the biggest challenges facing the country as a whole. And unfortunately, some of these trailblazer programs, they're amazing, they're brilliant, but they're only in a few places. We need them in more places, and we need to be tackling not just the unemployed. And the Secretary of State talked a lot about kind of using benefit sanctions. Benefit sanctions don't touch the economically inactive. That is the problem. So we need to be talking about this cohort, and which unfortunately also includes 6 out of 10 NEET young people are economically inactive. So over half. And they are not those who are going to be kind of coerced by having tougher sanctions put on them, because they're not affected by the sanctions, as it were. So there is definitely good instincts there, but we want to see more, and we need to see it tackling the big problems of health-related inactivity, not just unemployment.
Fantastic. Ollie, I'm actually going to come to you for a reply if you want to come back on what Sophia said. But let me just first of all say, I'm going to come to questions from the audience in a moment. Ollie, just over to you, because I was going to reply to Sophia, but I thought maybe you could.
Well, I obviously agree that the more money you can give to men, the better. But I also probably kind of have a bit more sympathy for government. I don't actually just mean this government; I mean government in general, and felt similarly about the last government. In that, what we're asking for, and mayors will always be a kind of a provoking force within the system. We're always going to say we want more, we want to do more, we want more resource, we want more flexibility, we want more funding. And I think if you do give us that, see the results, and you will get that devolution dividend. So mayors will always say that, and we will always kind of work in that way. But actually, what that involves doing that is reshaping the state. That is not an easy thing to do. So kind of I have some sympathy with government. There's actually we need to work through the problem and work out how to do it before simply handing over that cash. Because actually, this is public sector money. This is taxpayers' money. We need to make sure that is protected. Now, as much as people like me might say, we know we can do this, there is an expectation, I think, and not an unrealistic one, that we have to prove that case before we get more. And so the trailblazers that they put in place, we need to show we can deliver results. And then the government, yes, should absolutely lean into that. Absolutely look what Liz Kendall wants to do, as do other ministers and secretaries of state, and right from Keir on down. But actually, we've got a responsibility in this system as mayors to prove that point first. And so kind of put that on us as well, and we will then go away and deliver.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that you need to prove it. Maybe we'll come back in a year early and you can tell us how you've got on. But also that if this is really going to work, it's about strategic and systemic change. And so actually that 6 billion, Sophia, that you're asking for is already there in the system potentially. So if the trailblazers work as they could work, where the potential is, that 6 billion may be unlocked from where the money already is, and it's just going to be better spent and focused and targeted in a much better way than it is currently being spent. So let's just go to the final video from Alan Milburn. At the end of my interviews for Digital Futures for Good, I normally ask the guest if they were Prime Minister, what would they do to fix the digital divide? So I asked Alan a slightly different question, and this is what he said. And then I'm going to go to the questions. We've got 2 in the chat panel at the moment. So if you could eradicate digital exclusion in the next decade, what would be some of your priorities?
It's very simple. You'd eradicate poverty. And in particular, you'd eradicate child poverty in this country. Because in the end, digital exclusion is an expression of something even bigger, which is social and economic exclusion. And that's because the gap between the haves and the have-nots is too wide. And we've got to provide more opportunities for people to fulfill their aspirations to progress. And that requires approaches that are about narrowing that gap and making sure that no child in our country, we're a wealthy country, no child should really be growing up in poverty. And so, that's a big thing. It's not a small thing. That's not a narrow public policy instrument. That requires a lot of different types of approaches. But in the end, we won't get to the eradication of digital exclusion unless we get to more prosperity and less poverty being more being dealt with.
Wonderful. I love our leaders talking to us about eradicating poverty. Like, wouldn't that be fantastic? I mean, obviously, the other thing that I didn't say to Alan Milburn, but I could have done, is that by tackling digital exclusion, that also is a lever to help people to get out of poverty. So that digital inclusion isn't just the outcome of eradicating poverty, it's actually a tool to help us to do that. So let's go first. So there's 2 questions in the chat panel. Please do add some more in if anyone has one. The second question there is about the role of the private sector in collaborating to solve these societal problems. So Oliver, Sophia, would one of you like to take that question? Oh, you're both going, which is great. Oliver, and then I'll come to you, Sophia. Oliver, you go first.
I mean, I think I've touched on it already in the sense of we have to do this with, not to. And so kind of this is not just a benefit to the public sector because we get people off the the welfare bill, this is a benefit to the state, because actually we get taxpayers into the system, but more importantly, we get people who get the benefit of working, and that benefits the whole of the economy. And South Yorkshire's economy is too small. We need to be net contributors to the Treasury, not net beneficiaries of kind of national spend, and therefore that is incumbent upon grow the economy in a sustainable way, which means we cannot have a situation where 1 in 4 people are economically inactive. We cannot have a situation where we have 70,000 workless households. And so solving that requires a partnership approach between all the different services, and allows us to through the private sector, deliver effectively those solutions that we've talked about in the Pathways to Work Commission. So it's fundamentally a partnership approach that benefits everybody, because employers do tell us regularly, look, the labour market is tight in South Yorkshire. There are, as Alan articulated in Barnsley, kind of very few jobs increasingly, because they've done such a good job of getting back on their feet. But actually what we need to do is make sure that the people that are kind of contributing to creating those jobs have a labour market that works. So it's a real partnership approach. That's how we did the Pathways to Work Commission, and it's how we'll deliver the solutions to it as well.
That's it. And Sophia?
Yeah, I agree. I think the approach of partnership is really the right one. And there's some practical things that employers can do. They can model good practice of flexible working, or those employment practices that help people make that kind of slow, gradual slope into work. And also provide things like occupational health within the workplace. Lots of NHS waiting lists are clogged up by people who want to get back to work but are waiting for this appointment. There's things that employers can do, and there is kind of benefit in kind. But on the same kind of time, I'm very conscious of that lots of employers are feeling the pinch, particularly of the national insurance hike. So we don't want to put everything on them. But the kind of twin track to that is, I think, philanthropists and that kind of idea of investing in the country for social good. And there are so many across the country who want to give to kind of social investment projects that will see that return. So the government needs to kind of not see philanthropy as a kind of dirty word, and see that as a positive partnership, the kind of levers that they can do to make sure that people can give in a way that is effective. I think there's a real role for government there. And that kind of links, I guess, also to the first question about what Brown and Blair did well in the 1990s. And they did really bring in private partnership into hospitals, into things that nobody would have thought was possible before, and saw good results. So again, I think this government needs to be really clear about that they are pro-business, that they are not, out there just to kind of hammer businesses from a tax perspective, but they see them as equal partners in seeing this country thrive. And I think there's some messaging that needs to kind of go out there to really reassure the business community that they're partners, not kind of on either sides of the aisle in this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Ollie, the Computers for Charity talked about the New Deal in the 1990s, but also specifically about this like Computers Within Reach scheme. So do you have any comments on that question? I think it was about how can we learn from this, both mistakes and successes. And Blair and Brown did really understand the role of technology in boosting the economy and boosting social mobility.
It's not a scheme I know particularly well, if I'm perfectly honest. But what I can talk about is, for instance, we've delivered in South Yorkshire now something called Beds for Babies, right, which is a programme to guarantee a safe place to sleep for every child under 5 in the whole of South Yorkshire. We do that through a partner, Baby Basics UK, working with primary care networks in order to be able to help people who go home from hospital or are growing up in South Yorkshire without a bed. And so far over the last 5 months, we've delivered, I think, nearly 1,000 beds to over 500 families to make sure that poverty is no longer there. Now, if we can do that for beds, which we increasingly can, why can't we do that with other solutions and other response to other problems that people have across the region? Now, we've got to work through those challenges, of course, and how that, because they will always be delivered and tailored in different ways. But that's what devolution gives you, is the opportunity to solve problems in place, working with partners that I know well and know by name, in order to make sure that we're responding to those challenges. And that means both private, public, charitable, kind of coming together in place to respond to those challenges, whether that's computers or beds or, frankly, your 5 a day. How do we do that in place? And that's what devolution gives you.
Yeah, that's great. James, I won't come to you with this question, but he's made a really good point about that one-to-one support. And I would add to that the people who probably have the most complex and challenging needs for those organisations, particularly I think working in the third sector, how expensive that is and how dependent I think so many programs in the state, and it is that safety net.
Can I just respond to that challenge, which is to say there is a moral imperative for us to help everybody, and I think we would all hopefully agree with that. You know, regardless of the challenges that people face as a society, we have to help people where they are, as I already explained. But actually, I think often we get into this mindset of it's expensive to help people. You know what? It's bloody expensive not to help people. It's really incredibly expensive not to help people, to leave them to rack and ruin, to be unemployed, in some instances, then to fall into ill health, to engage in things that we might otherwise wish they hadn't engaged in, is a really expensive thing for us to fix. It's much easier for us to prevent. And that's what we're trying to do in South Yorkshire through our work on the Integrated Care Partnership, through our ICS as well. You know, all the partners in South Yorkshire are engaged in that at the moment. And we've been talking about this for decades, but we actually fundamentally have to change how this works. And devolution gives us the opportunity to have people like me connecting up services and systems like ICP and the work we're doing through Ways to Work to actually allow us to start preventing some of these problems rather than just responding to them when they become problems in and of themselves.
Absolutely. I think James's point was also that as a community organisation, not for profit, bidding into funders, they want it on the cheap because they don't believe they're there to try and fix these expensive problems, provide small amounts of grant money. And so I think actually the more joined up we can be, then the better. Well, thank you so much. It's been an exciting week. We have a new white paper, and we definitely have a government who's getting on with stuff. Although it's not 6 billion, Sophia, it is a lot of money being spent to try and bring all of this together. I'm based in Sheffield, so I'm delighted that there's quite a lot of work here going on in South Yorkshire. And Oliver, thank you for your leadership. South Yorkshire. Thank you both for coming. So the next episode is on financial inclusion. In fact, it's our last Digital Futures for Good, which is our 2024 conversation series. So our last one is on the 12th of December, and it's about the link between financial inclusion and digital inclusion. The right link is in the chat panel, and then in the end of January we're launching the report with Martha Lane Fox, and so that will be on Zoom at the end of January as well. So thank you both so much. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Sophia, and thank you everybody for attending. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.